Italian Football Podcast.
Peach writes, "Hi guys, happy Champions League final week. Speaking of which, I've heard a lot of opinions about this and I want to know what you think." You sent this before the question, before the Champions League final, just to clear up. He says, if Inter end up losing the final, God forbid, what would you say about Inzaghi's tenure at Inter? Would this season only be a failure, or would his entire 4 years so far be muddled by this zero trophy season? I know he had to deal with a lot over the years, but this is more about him taking the opportunity, and he didn't. First season against Milan, where he should have done better to at least give himself a lead going into the final games of the season. The Champions League final was pretty much on Lukaku against City, so I won't blame him. But the Scudetto loss this year is annoying. All the drop points before. But also not going all out to beat Lazio, where you can snatch it away on the last day, is one of the opportunities I'm talking about. Those gigantic moments seem to him not so gigantic at times, especially in the league. In the Champions League, he's a different beast. Really interested to hear your take on this. Thanks, guys, and I hope this won't need to be discussed again if Inter win the Champions League. Forza Inter. What do you think?
On the pitch, very simple. Underachieved significantly in Serie A, winning only 1 from 4, went into with the best squad every single season, but overperformed massively in the Champions League, given the financial gap between the Serie A and the rest of the year, which we detailed on Monday's pod. But obviously, if you don't then win that trophy, then obviously you've still got nothing to show for it tangibly. So but yeah, that's it. So on the pitch, simple as that, really.
I think it depends on what your magnifying lens is or what lens you're using here. If you look at the entire tenure as a whole, where Inter were, because the way I see it is, the Suning era ended with Inzaghi resigning. The era that was almost 10 years with 7 trophies, 3 European finals. And it makes it historically probably 3rd or 4th in terms of successful eras in Inter's history. I'd probably hold the Moratti family, of course. Angelo and Massimo are 1 and 2. Then you have the Pellegrini era, who sadly passed away. Ernesto Pellegrini, legendary Inter president. And even though he only won 1 Scudetto, he did win in Europe the UEFA Cup a couple of times, which was very important. So I'd say 4th in terms of the most successful and most important. They modernized Inter. They dragged Inter in from the cold. 3 finals in Europe, not winning 1 is obviously a disappointment. But to reach those finals, given where Inter were before they started bringing Inter back into relevancy, is an achievement in and of its own. Now, if you look at Inzaghi's part in that, if you look at what he took over and you look at what he leaves the club in a much better position than when he found it. He leaves the club with having one Serie A title, which is a underachievement, absolutely is. But the fact that they won number 20 and the fact that they beat Milan and the way that they did it does kind of alleviate a little bit, but still it was an underachievement. But if you look at the Champions League, above all, bringing Inter to 2 finals in the Champions League is a massive overachievement. Given that if you look at the investment that he's done, that he's received, it's 114 million profit these 4 years. He's equaled the number of Champions League finals that Max Allegri did at Juve, whilst Juve were overspending those years.
That's not true.
Inter, yeah,
they weren't overspending. They overspent after that, after the Champions League.
They spent 98 million euros on Gonzalo Higuain.
Yeah, that was but after those 2 Champions Leagues, that's when they started to overspend. That money for Higuain came from a lot of big sales before, including Pogba for
I'm
100
talking
million.
but I'm talking about
The
the
Higuain
fact.
money came from Pogba the same
Yeah,
summer.
but
So
I know.
they didn't
But
overspend before. They overspent after with the Ronaldo and all that. That was when they overspent. They didn't overspend on those 2 Champions
they
Leagues. That was
overspent. They
Marotta.
outspent Inter for sure. They didn't turn 114 million euro profit when Allegri was the coach of Juve. They turned from the transfer market. They did not do that.
It was a miracle. What Juventus did there was not as much of a miracle as Inter did, but was also a miracle based on the finances of Juventus compared to the top teams. Is exact Marotta's done exactly the same. Really.
Yeah, he's done, but the difference is that at Juve he had more money to spend, much more money to spend, and that's the point. That at Inter there was not that money to spend during the Inzaghi era. When Marotta was at Juve, there was that money to spend. And Inzaghi has equaled what Allegri did in Europe with a team that had much less money spent on it. That is a huge achievement by Inzaghi, and I understand if fans or people who view football only as trophy hoarding on Wikipedia, then that's a failure. Then everything is a failure unless you win trophies. But if you look at the whole as a whole, where Inter were when he took over and what he leaves after, look at the players he developed, players that he got to take the next step, the results, they are good. If you also take into consideration the money that was invested, and money is kind of important in football. Otherwise, we wouldn't. Otherwise, if it wasn't important, then Real Madrid and PSG wouldn't be where they are. Man City wouldn't be where they are.
I think more of the credit for that goes to Marotta than it does for Inzaghi. Inzaghi does a lot of credit does go to Inzaghi as well, of course, but I think it's Marotta that's most responsible for the whole creating a great squad with no money than it is for Inzaghi.
Well,
Of course,
Inzaghi made them play together.
Yeah,
Inzaghi got
needs
the
to make them
results on the
play. He
pitch.
needs to improve them and all that kind of stuff. So yes, he does absolutely. But I think Marotta is the number one.
I think that's the thing though, and I'm glad you brought that up, because if we look at them, you have to look at them together. I think the Marotta Inzaghi era is successful for Inter overall, based on everything that happened. Again, where was the club when they started working together? Now that he's left, where are they now? They're in a much better position in terms of finances, in terms of credibility in Europe, which is something that nobody thought was possible in this era, given the discrepancy in spending. However, we can't discard that there's 2 issues here that is a negative on both of them. And I want to start with Marotta. Beppe Marotta has now burnt 2 world-class coaches. When Antonio Conte, that first season, stood in front of the cameras after the Atalanta game in COVID and yelled ferociously that he was angry that he hadn't been backed he'd been backed 0 by the club, and he was very clear to say this had nothing to do with the transfer window. And he said it had nothing to do with the transfer window. I remember going, what is he talking about? What does he mean? Then they met at Moratti's villa, they patched things up, and the Inter won the Scudetto. Now I look at these 4 years with Inzaghi and the way that he's been treated and not backed by Marotta, not in the transfer window. That's a separate, everyone can see that he hasn't been backed in the transfer window. But the fact that he hasn't backed his coach, like when Inzaghi in January came out and said and criticized the refereeing decisions, and Marotta's reaction was to come out and say, no, we don't want to create any problems or polemica. That's throwing your coach under the bus. And this is something Marotta does. He values his diplomatic relations, his strategic relations, more than his coaches. No other president, no other senior director does that at any club in the Serie A, except for Beppe Marotta. And that is what led to Inzaghi being tired, feeling alone and not backed. And that's why this ended prematurely the way that it did. As for Inzaghi, you have to be dishonest if you don't admit that the manner in which he leaves, even though he's done lots of positive things for the club, he leaves the club in a cowardly way. And that does tarnish his legacy. He leaves Inter after the worst defeat in Inter's modern history. He leaves Inter after a 5 to 8 weeks where he and Marotta did not handle this exit well at all. And that created destabilization of Inter, which partly, not entirely, but partly can explain the mental collapse we saw against PSG. And that's unacceptable on Inzaghi. And that's where I am with all of this. I think you can't just, things have nuance. There's levels to everything, and there's one side on the one hand, on the other hand. And that's where I'm kind of am with both Inzaghi and Marotta. With Marotta, whoever the new coach is, and we're going to have I think we've got a question on Fabregas. Essentially, what this means now is that the Inter winning cycle is over. This is now a oak tree goes redbird project, where financial sustainability, bringing in young coaches to finish in the top 4, hopefully to do blah, blah, blah. All that stuff is where this is going now. It's obvious. Cesc Fabregas doesn't even have his full coaching badges. If he were to be appointed by Inter, he won't be able to coach them in the FIFA Club World Cup because he doesn't have all the UEFA Pro licenses. In fact, when he needs to get it, Coverciano is when the Club World Cup is being played. So we've gone from the level we were under Suning to a rebuild and a reboot where Inter will have to adapt to the new reality, and they've gone down the route of Redbird. That's just a reality. But whether that is good or bad, one good thing is Inter have Marotta. Marotta's CV, Marotta's experience shows that he knows how to reboot. He knows how to rebuild, just like he did when Conte left and Inzaghi came on board, and they still managed to be competitive and they won trophies. So it's not that black and white. It's on the one hand, it's on the other hand. But so that's where we are with this.
Yeah.